Hello and welcome to another episode of Software Should Be Free with Tim Abel and David Sheardown. And today we're going to talk about ShapeUp from Basecamp, which is a really interesting approach to managing software projects. You're probably familiar with Agile and Scrum and Kanban and that kind of thing. So Basecamp have basically been ignoring all of that and doing their own thing, and they recently published their own process. So I'm going to talk through what I've learned about it and how I think it fits in, and my good friend David is going to ask me questions about what I've missed. So
I will.
I will start with a bit about the picture in the world of software. So we have waterfall, which is the engineering project way of doing things that nobody likes anymore. We have agile, which is a dictionary term, meaning like you can move quickly and change direction, which has taken on a particular meaning in consulting. We have Scrum, which is a very specific way of being agile with stand-ups and planning and retrospectives on a sprint cycle. And we have Kanban, which is a flow-based thing that comes out of Toyota manufacturing. And the new thing is ShapeUp. So Basecamp is a software consultancy. The DHH, who David Heinemeier Hansen, who is a co-founder of that, is the creator of Ruby on Rails, so he's very famous in the software world. And they're a bit of a thought leader in software. They created Basecamp, which is project management for software teams. The other person involved in this, who published this, is Jason Fried, who is the other co-founder, as I understand it. So the primary premise of this, I thought that ShapeUp kind of meant get into shape, like stop doing things wrong. That was my initial impression of the title. Like, you're all doing it wrong, you should shape up. But it's not that at all, actually. The name comes from their process of refining an idea through to something that's ready to work on, and they call that process shaping. So I'll just summarize the steps. So they do shaping, and then they pitch the idea to try and get it worked on, and then they take bets on what they would actually like to work on, and then that goes into 6-week cycles. With that, you have to bear in mind that they're a product company, so they're not a digital agency that's got a client deadline. They're looking at long-term value on their product. And they have gaps between these 6-week cycles. So these cycles are effectively even longer, where they cool down and think about the next thing and work on technical debt that's built up and that kind of thing.
That does sound interesting, though.
Yeah. Do you have any questions off the back of?
No. Well, apart from the fact that it's new to me, actually, I had the same thing. I think I've heard that. Maybe you've seen it on Twitter about ShapeUp. I was thinking, I was thinking from a fitness perspective, so I was totally off the mark. So, but no, carry on. No, it sounds good.
Yeah, I think you're not alone. I did a quick poll of my team here, and not one single hand went up when I asked who had read it or heard of it. So I think it's quite a good subject to cover. So I will go a bit deeper into what it means to shape an idea in their terms. So shaping happens while other people are building things. So that they might be, there's not a time when you do shaping. Shaping is a constant process where if you have an idea, then you would work on shaping it. It's not tied to the cycles, the 6-week cycles. And anyone can do this. The person who has the idea, they would take input from everybody. They use a Google Documents system to collate all of this information into something coherent. They use just the right level of fidelity to get the idea across, but nothing more. So they would use wireframes or sketches, or they really promote the idea of just writing some words, not going any higher fidelity than that. And by fidelity, I mean the spectrum between just a few words up to a full Photoshop or an actual working product. They like to get the idea to the point where they've solved a problem, or at least made it so that if you pick this up, it would be the solution to a problem. They try and make sure that any risks have been addressed in the pitch, in this document that they're creating, and that any potential rabbit holes that could, say, divert the engineering team for 6 months have been mentioned. They might say, we're not going to cover this because we think this is a possible rabbit hole, so this is not part of the scope. They'll put it in front of the tech folk to get their input and see if there's anything else they hadn't thought of. Then they go through a process of refining, where they narrow down what it is they're looking at doing. They try and go deeper, so they try and get beneath what, say, the customer asked for and understand like why they wanted it, and maybe come up with a smaller solution that maybe is a better answer that solves the person's problem. And I think from what I've heard, you can see that in the Basecamp product, that they've got kind of like a lightweight product that just solves the problem and doesn't do anything extra. This document that they're creating, it has to be bounded to be finished, so it specifies what they're going to do, but also what they're not going to do. It also has to specify what their appetite of spending time is. So you have to say on this document, we're willing to bet 2 weeks on this, or we're willing to bet 6 weeks on this. So that gives it a context in terms of value versus money of the thing that you're trying to do, which is really interesting. They also specify the bounds of design to prevent over-engineering. So I'd have to go and read a bit more. It's a little while since I read this, so I had to read a little bit more on what exactly they meant by that. But it's all up on the internet. Oh, I should mention, you can read this at basecamp.com/shapeup.
Okay.
It's all up there in public, and this is where I got this from. I think
so
I also had some interviews. Carry on. Yep.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask a quick question there. Obviously, Dave, there's obviously a lot of talk about agile is dead, and things like that, grand statements, which are good for LinkBase. But is it just, obviously, they've gone through this process. They've got a good history. They've obviously, had plenty of sort of like years of building products and such. But is there, to your knowledge at the moment, is there anybody else using their methodology apart from them?
I don't think so. I think they released this really not very long ago.
Right.
And my view on this is, I think like everybody should pay attention and take the bits that work for them. And maybe we'll see shape-up consultancies show up and teach people how to do it, just like we've seen Scrum and Agile consultancies show up. I think there's it's a good fit for certain kinds of teams and products. There's probably some training opportunities to be had there, but I think it's really early days. But definitely something to learn from. Shall I carry on with the shaping up bit?
Yeah, please. Cool. Yeah, sorry, yeah.
So in terms of who does the shaping up and where and how they do it, they talked about interaction design being part of it. They talked about the people doing it being technically literate. It's a strategic thing, so they're trying to do strategic direction of the product. They might not involve anyone else initially, so it might be a closed door thing. So they might do as I'm doing now and go and shut a door in a meeting room and just sketch things out. They mentioned the idea that the early ideas could be really fragile, and you need to flesh them out a little bit more before you talk to other people. But that's not to say they don't. As I mentioned earlier, they do put the ideas in front of everybody so that there aren't surprises when they come to work on it. They might do it just individually, or they might pull in a trusted collaborator. Well, I mean, they're all trusted in that company, but they might pull in a particular collaborator to work on it. It's really important that it's a really fast and rough process getting this initial idea down. They don't like make it a heavyweight process, and then they'll refine it before they share it more broadly. As I mentioned, it's not scheduled in their cycle of time. It's just whenever inspiration strikes, they'll go off and do it. They have this concept of breadboards, and they're talking about electronic breadboards. So they talk about maybe something that functions but doesn't have design aesthetics, doesn't maybe meet a bunch of criteria that the real product would require. They use that term quite a lot in the document. They talk about words not pictures is quite a strong thing for them. So when they're like sketching out like a flow of how some screens might work together, they might literally just write login in a box. That would represent a login.
People know that. Yeah.
So really keeping it as low fidelity as they can to get the message across. And they've got a specific thing that they outline. So they go in quite a lot of detail of their specific process. So they have this idea about how you write a word and then some more words underneath for what is on that page, for example, or how it behaves, and then drawing arrows from one box of words to another box of words to indicate the flow of things. Nothing too surprising, but just like a nice lightweight approach. They mentioned fat marker sketches, which again is like when they're sketching out designs to prevent getting too refined. So they use literally a big fat marker pen. Again, trying to get that lightweight fidelity. And one of the sort of key things is the output of this is the elements of it. So the pieces of the product, bearing in mind that it's a SaaS software product that they produce, so like the particular interaction screens that would be part of the resultant improvement, those elements are a key part of the output of this shaping up process. They make sure they leave the room in the design for the designers to do their good work, so they try and avoid sort of preemptively designing. It's really important that they can walk away from it. They can get halfway through and go, do you know what, this isn't turning into something that we actually are that keen on anymore. It may never even get presented to anyone else. They might just can it, but they can throw these things away at any point. But if they're happy with it, then they will turn it into what they call a pitch. And I can get onto the pitching bit next. But do you have any questions before we plow on?
No. That's I like the fact that, I think with all of the tools that are out there to create all these crazy sort of processes, that they're, it's almost like back to basics with this, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Like you said there, they just write login. People know what that does. Yes, there's some technicalities behind it, but I like that sort of like back to the base template there, literally. So
they haven't got caught up in any of the hype and process ideas that everybody else has come up with and is trying to apply regardless of fit. I think they've probably paid attention to this stuff, but just gone their own way. Cool. Right, I shall move on. Exactly. So the next stage in the process is a pitch. So they, one of the things that I liked is that it's up to everybody to keep their own list of things that they think should happen. That includes sales, support, marketing, engineering, security people, ops people. They're one of the companies that promote no backlog. And I've never really understood that, because I was like, well, what if there was something important? You just forget it.
Yeah.
But the answer is the person who thinks it's important maintains their own private backlog. So you don't have this centralized grab bag. So people take their private ideas, create a pitch, and then they have this process called the betting table, where everybody gets together and says, I think this is the thing that we want to do. And they have like a head of engineering and a head of finance and head of product or something like that. I forget their exact structure, but those are the people that get to decide. So it's still like senior management in the company that get to decide what happens and what doesn't. But they'll look at all of these pitches and decide what's the best thing for the company. So they're looking at product design, they're looking at cost, they're looking at resourcing. So they come to the betting table. They look at what's in there. They look at the appetite, as they call it, for each pitch. So whether it's what they call a small batch, which is a 2-week piece of work, or a big batch, which is a 6-week piece of work. So that would fill up their entire cycle. If it's bigger, then it has to be broken down. A key thing is it's a fixed time variable scope. So you get the 2 weeks or the 6 weeks. If it's not done by then the default is to cease, because they've learned that if they don't have that, projects like, it's nearly finished, we'll just throw another week on. It's nearly finished, we'll just throw another month on, and they just run away. And they're like, we spent 3 months and then we canned it. So the default is back to the betting table, try again. Which I think is quite a good way of managing risk. And that's why they call them bets. We bet on this being a good improvement, but they're not absolutely even at this
actually,
point.
that's a good point, actually, isn't it? It's like it is like literally betting. You see what hand you've got, and how much am I going to sort of prepare to lose at this or gain by it. So yeah, that's perfect.
I do have the list of people. So involved in the people that make the decision on the bets are the CEO, the CTO, a senior programmer, and a project strategist. So these are the decision makers. Excellent. I did have it more precise.
Right.
Cool. And then once they've decided what bets they're going to take, so it could be one big batch bet, which is 6 weeks, or 3 small batch bets, I guess, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Then the 6 week cycle starts. They spend their 6 weeks working on the product, and then at the end of that, they call an end to that, and they go into their gap between cycles, which is a great way of being able to like go hell for leather on a product feature, but then still pay down technical debt, still sort out systems that need to be worked on, and deal with the other things that come up.
Right. Right.
And one of the other concepts that they have in there is the idea of work as a hill. They've built this into Basecamp as an estimating thing. They think that like a Gantt chart or a percentage is silly, and it feels like it's more of a hill. Like as you come up the hill, you can't see what's on the other side, and you build and you build and you go up the hill, and then as you get to the top, you can see the rest of the hill, and it's all downhill from there. I quite like that.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how that works into their process, but I think in terms of knowing whether they're going to hit their 6 week and whether to improve or reduce fidelity of the actual end thing, I think that's how they manage that, and they obviously promote this as a method as well, which goes in hand with their Basecamp product. And then once they've finished that, they then move on. They get feedback, which then becomes new bets that get shaped up. It doesn't automatically get a follow-up priority. So it's just because they've worked on something and it wasn't perfect doesn't mean it comes to the table with any kind of greater weight. They still shape it up with everything else and then comes to the betting table, which is great. And they have a cool down time, which I think is the gap, which stops like a knee-jerk reaction to something that's happened. So that summarizes the process. We're running a bit short of time. So let me just plow straight into some notes I made on what that means, because really you're going to be looking at, do I want to run a team as a Scrum team, a Kanban team, or a Shape Up team, or some blend? The Shape Up process, it has no backlog. Like I mentioned, everyone keeps their own to-dos and brings a pitch. This means you don't lose time to repeatedly grooming a backlog of things that maybe don't matter that much, but important things don't get forgotten, because people will make sure they bring their top priorities, and people can bring those top things. So like the support team might have a real pain for their users, they can bring like just the top 2 things and go, look, this is really important. Whereas if it was on a backlog, the product manager might spend all morning reviewing a backlog and pick a few tech debt items and never touch it. They default to no. They have a nice way of saying that, which is, that's interesting, maybe we'll do that some way. So they avoid judging too early. So they don't kill things immediately if they're not sure. They still give it credit for potentially being a good idea, but something really has to earn its way into being built. Some of the reasons behind why I think they're going this way: risk management. So they never overrun, because if it hits 6 weeks, that's it, it's dead, and then it has to come back to the table. The efficiency of the whole thing, they don't spin their wheels on badly defined work where they discover what it really meant later. I think this is really good for product companies. I think you couldn't just take this wholesale and put it into other organizations. And I think a lot of teams would find 6 weeks plus the cooldown far too long to iterate, but you could still take concepts from this. It's really nice that they've written up their whole process for everybody to learn from. And even though you can't necessarily take this and apply it exactly to your own thing or your own team, I think it's well worth actually taking the time to read this. It's probably a 2 or 3 hour read. So yeah, that's everything that I had written down about this wonderful piece of sharing from Basecamp. So we have about 2 minutes. Is there anything that you'd like to dig into?
No, I think it sounds really good, and I think all I was going to say is that it's like everything with, like you said, the waterfall approach. We used that for countless years, and then it was, Agile, Scrum, and I think like everything, just as humans, I think we tend to try to just keep throwing things at it, And I remember being at a big, organization. It was all, we had these cards and we'd do these things, and to be honest, it's and I think that's why it's almost like fatigue, isn't it? It's like agile fatigue, is that there's maybe too much around the hype of it, or the
the dogmatism.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I've always liked 37 Signals and those guys anyway. But I think their approach, and like I say, they're not afraid just to stand out and say, look, yeah, we don't like that, we're going with this. So I think that clear back to basics approach, because how much do you really need? Probably not a great deal. And that sounds, it's a bit of a breath of fresh air. Like you say, it might not work for every organization. There might be parts of it, but I think it's definitely got a cleaner feel that I'm definitely going to read up about it, because as I say, I heard the term, heard the word, now I know where to look.
Cool. Well, I'll wrap it up there and say to anyone listening, I hope you found that really useful. If you know anyone who you think would benefit from a bit more of an idea about what Basecamp have been up to, please do share this episode with them, and please do follow us on Twitter or sign up to the mailing list or something, but just do get in touch. Let us know that you found that useful, and we will see you next time. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Tim, and we'll see you next time.